Greetings, all friends. Today we have a super interesting discussion, which is crucial for several things. It's crucial for bridging the metaphysical and physical cosmos, and it's crucial for, therefore it's crucial for translating Bhagavatam's dimensions, astronomical dimensions, into empirically valid dimensions, measurements. And it is also aligned with, supportive of the same observations and everything that leads to the current raging theory of dark matter. So it's all packed up in one statement from Bhagavatam's 5th canto, 17th chapter, 11th text, which is apparently kind of simple at first, but let's take a look at it. So I call this the perceptual ratio. Tatrapi bharatameva varsham Karmakshetra. Of all these places, Bharata is the only one in which we are active. So of all what places? This is just coming after chapter 16, which is now available in this book, where he described the whole local cosmos, the earth, the sun, and all the regions on the earth, and how the earth moves around the sun and the internal regions and everything. So now he says, out of all of these things, tatrapi, bharatameva, only Bharata is the varsha, the area, that we are active in, Karmakshetra. Anyanyashtavarshani, svarginam punya sheshopabhoga sthanani. The other 8 are places in which we enjoy the good deeds that still remain after heaven. We'll explain this in detail. Let's just get introduced to what he's saying. Of all the places in Bu, Bharata is the only one in which we are active, human beings are active. The other 8 places, remember there's 9 varshas. Bharata Varsha is the one in which we are active. The other 8 are, it's not just that we live in Bharata Varsh because Shuka is speaking in New Delhi and Bharata is India. Bharata is not originally India. Bharata is originally the world. In other words, the original denotation of the word Bharata was not just the Indian subcontinent. He's saying the only place that humans are active is Bharata. The rest of the places, you might think, oh, these guys are racist. So anybody that's not living in India is not a human? Is that what they're saying? No, he's saying the opposite thing. In the places outside of Bharata, the people are superior. The other 8 places on Bu are places in which the good deeds are enjoyed, like Swarga, like heaven, but this is the Sheshopabhoga. Shesha means the remainder, like what's left over after you take the main part is the Shesha. So Punya Shesha. After the main part has been enjoyed, Upabhoga, then the remainder gets enjoyed here. I'll explain it a little bit more in a second. Bhomani swargapadani vyapadishanti. Hence they are described as heavenly earths. So altogether what he said was, of all the places on Bu, Bharata is the only one in which humans are active. The other 8 are places in which we enjoy the good deeds that still remain after heaven. Hence they are described as heavenly earths, Bhoma Swarga, Upaswarga. All right? Now, that, like, you might not realize how this is going to bridge the metaphysical cosmos to the physical cosmos, but you might, now that I mention it, kind of see it. And how it's therefore, by bridging the metaphysical cosmos to the physical cosmos, is therefore going to take all of Shuka's dimensions from the previous chapter and make them match what we actually see with our human experience. So let us talk about that. First, let's talk about the sequence of the statements here in this chapter. Where does this statement pop out of? And what kind of flow makes this part of the conversation happen? Shuka mentioned just previously. So this chapter was started off by talking about exosolar water, a comet bringing water to the earth. And then when it impacted the earth, it split into different parts and fell on different areas and flooded the different areas to different extents. So when he talked about the waters that flowed into Bhartavarsh, he made a big statement about how pious these waters are, how sacred they are, how they generate good karma for people. He said that with each step towards these rivers, people generate better karma than they generate by performing Vedic ceremonies. So he would anticipate that after making such a statement, Parikshit would wonder, why are you saying this about the water in Bharta and not about the water in Kuru or Hari or some other Varsha? What's so special about the water when it's in Bharta? It's the same water, isn't it? It came from the same place. So to address, anticipating that question, Shuka makes this statement that clarifies that the people in the other varshas are what's different. Not the water in the other varshas that is different, but the people. The people in the other varshas are not karmic. They're not on the karmic plane. They're not in Karmakshetra. Now, what does that mean? That means they do not perform action based on newly initiated motivations or desires or decisions. So this may be a new thought to you, but action is predicated upon decision, and decision is predicated upon desire. Right? So karma is predicated upon generation of new desires. And if you're not generating new desires, you don't have any impetus to new decisions. Therefore, you don't have any impetus to new actions. In other words, when you're happy, you don't start looking for something else to do you? You keep doing the same thing. In fact, that's kind of a way that we measure how appealing something is. How long can we get lost in it before we look at the clock? So in paradise and in the sub-paradises, people are not initiating new activity because of the extremely pleasant nature of existence there. Similarly, if you are suffering, you also are not initiating new activity. You're trying to correct a previous activity. You'll be trying to solve the problem. So also in subhuman existences, they are not initiating new karmas. The human form of existence is special because it has this balance. Because it has this balance between satisfaction and dissatisfaction, which leads one to come up with new ideas and make new decisions, and therefore generate new destiny by making new actions. So human life is called Karmakshetra, the activity in which karma, the field in which activity is generated. So Bardo's asking, are they people or just beings? What's the difference? And they are people. One sec. Getting messages from the boss. Okay. Therefore, they do not generate karma, good or bad. They simply enjoy the remainder of the results from their previous actions. Now, I want to explain the concept of Bhoma Swarga, or earthly heavens. We enjoy most of the results of very meritorious actions in realms intentionally designed to facilitate entirely positive experiences. These are called paradise or heaven, Swarga. Some portion of our good karma, however, may be too good to experience on earth, but not quite good enough to warrant paradise. To accommodate this, the universe has earthly heavens. These are paradisic realms that are on a smaller, more earthly scale. So, when you make choices which are harmonious with the whole nature of the universe, then the results of those choices are very enjoyable. And when we make choices and decisions and have motivations that are disharmonious with the whole nature of the universe, then the results of those decisions and desires and actions are unenjoyable, difficult. So when you exist in a certain place, you might not be able to experience the results of a particular action that you took. Like, let's say you live in a war zone, but you're doing very good deeds. How could you expect to immediately be enjoying the results of those good deeds? You're in a war zone. The war zone you have to be removed from the war zone first. Similarly, when you live on earth but are generating good karma, when you live as a human being but you're generating very good karma, you're not really going to get the results of that really good karma here and now, because it's not possible, because this place isn't designed to facilitate pure enjoyment. It's designed to facilitate the mixture, which inspires inspiration, right? So therefore, the universe has to have places that are designed not for inspiration, just for reward. And those places are called Swarga. So the big merits that we have, we enjoy in Swarga, but there's other merits that are not really warranting Swarga, don't really require that level of enjoyment, but also can't be fulfilled on earth. And for those experiences, the cosmos has Bhoma Swargas, earthly heavens. Now I want to explain the concept of Karmakshetra in a little bit more detail. The word kshetra means field. It's just similar to a farm. A farm is called a kshetra. This is a place in which we work. A kshetra is actually inherently a karmakshetra, a place in which you work. But it could be a bhogakshetra as well. That's what paradise is. Paradise is a field where the work is already done. Like right now, I have some land in a rural part of Japan, and it's Karmakshetra. There's a lot of work to be done there. Later on, after my grandkids, inherit the place, that's not going to be their Karmakshetra. Hopefully, it's probably going to be their Bhogakshetra. The work of setting it up was already done, and now they can just enjoy the results. So that's similar to the difference between earth and paradise. One is a Karmakshetra where you're making efforts to improve, and the other is a Bhogakshetra where you're enjoying the results of your efforts. So Shuka says that 1/9 of Bhu is the Karmakshetra, and the other 8 are where we enjoy the good results of our efforts. Barring unique exceptions, humans cannot directly access the earthly heavens. It would be like letting kids into a party or something. People that aren't supposed to be in a place don't get access to that place. So barring unique exceptions of humans that have uniquely qualified themselves by extreme austerities or extreme deeds, humans do not directly access the earthly heavens, nor the heavenly heavens. Shuka's description of life in these two, which is in the next 2 texts. The next 2 texts are going to briefly describe what it's like to live in those areas. And that will make it clear to you that those are not the parts of Earth that you see. Those are not the parts of Boo that you can see at all. We can only see, touch, measure, and interact with the Karmakshetra. So this is important to realize. Human beings are active in the Karmakshetra. Superhumans are active in the Bhogakshetra. In other words, the world that we know of right now with our normal eyes and ears is only one portion of Boo, and most of Boo is imperceptible and inaccessible to us. This is the key. So Kermit says, it is stated that Jambu Dweep is Kermit, you care about these things, I can tell, but why haven't you read my book? If you care, then this is a monumental thing that's been published, dissecting the 16th chapter. Jambu Dweep, surrounded by the salty ocean, 9 varshas in the ocean that we know is salty. You got that. You can understand what all that stuff is if you'll read this. Okay, and actually there's a part in here that addresses Himalaya Bharata. Himalaya is the South Pole. It's also called Himkuta. It cannot be the Himalayas because it's south of Bharata. It cannot be the Himalayas because the size is different. It cannot be the Himalayas also because Shuka gives it no size. So there's various reasons, and they're all explained in this book. But you're expressing a common misconception that people have and propagate about Shuka's astronomy. Stephanie asks, how can one have pleasure without desire? It's simple, actually. The desire comes first. And then the proper action towards the pleasure creates the situation where the desire is enjoyed. And while enjoying the results of the desire, hopefully one does not have another desire. Otherwise one's distracted. And that's, you understand? So Karmakshetra is sequentially first and then Bhoga. Casper asks, can or do the superhumans come to Bharata? Rarely. On occasion for some special reason. Otherwise, why would they? They don't have interest in it. Also, they don't have perception of any need to. They're absorbed in orgasmic pleasure, really, right? I have to say that word so that you can get a concept of why you wouldn't have another desire when you're in Bhoga, why you wouldn't have another desire while you're in Swarga, why you wouldn't be distracted towards some other activity. Because people can relate to that. All right, so at this point we're clear that Shuka has said that humans have access to a certain portion of Boo, but not to the whole Boo. Now, it becomes more interesting. Additional reason for this statement, besides addressing Parikshit's probable question about what makes the water special in Bharata, this statement also allows Shuka to reconcile the measurements he has given so far with the measurements of our human world. Correct, Bardo. Actually, if you come to the class tomorrow, we'll have some mention of that. Ultimate pleasure equals no sense of lack. Brahmananda gives kama vas, I forget the exact word, but he gives cessation of kama or desire. Okay, returning to this, why Bharata? Why does Shuk say that Bharata represents the Boo that we humans have access to? Why did he pick Bharata? Why isn't it a different one? One reason is that it is the bottom, or the lowest part of Boo, its southern Arctic circle, and this conforms to the vertical organization of the Vedic cosmos, where higher regions are generally more pleasant, and lower ones are generally less pleasant. So, this is really just the old cover of the book. There you see Bharata, it's the bottom, it's the southern Arctic region, so it just makes sense Vedically. The whole universe is organized vertically. So the part where humans are is on the bottom, and then the superior parts are superior in position. Another reason involves the size of the terrestrial human Earth and its distance from the moon, the regular moon, the terrestrial human moon, which is thought of as the gateway to space, heaven, or paradise. So think about the moon. The moon circles the Earth. While you're within the moon's orbit, you're still basically on the Earth. Yeah? But once you go past the moon's orbit, now you're in solar space. Now you're in space. So that concept or that reality is reflected in the Vedic thinking of Swarga begins after the moon. And between the moon and Earth is Bhoma Swarga or Bhuva. Bhuva Swarga. So Bhuva is the region between Bhu and Swarga, which is the same as the distance between the Earth that we observe and the moon that we observe. The concept that only one of the 9 areas of Bhu is accessible to humans is extremely important for deriving empirically valid numbers. Do you know what I mean by empirically valid? Empiric means what you can measure, what you can see, what you can experience. So if I say empirically valid, it means something that your eyes can confirm, something that your ears confirm, something you can confirm with a measurement, something measurable. So this concept that only a portion of Bhu is accessible to us is essential for deriving empirically valid numbers from the astronomical measurements that Shuka gave. Everything Shuka describes in the previous chapter matches what we in fact see in the world. So it already is empirically valid in terms of ratios and proportions. All the ratios are right, all the proportions are right. You know, the ratio of the sun, distance from the Earth, the 108 ratios, all of those are there. All the ratios between the latitudes, the ratios of the ecliptic producing the tropical latitudes and the Arctic latitudes, those are all perfect in their ratio. And this instills confidence that his model is not an imagination. However, his measurements have one very big problem. They're much too big. The ratios are right, but the proportion, the ratio is right, but the size, the scale is off, way off. Much too big compared to what we actually see with our eyes and instruments. Yet, they are much too big in what seems to be an organized and meaningful way. For example, his Bhu is so big that our Earth could sit exactly at its southern Arctic latitude, while our moon would sit exactly at its northern Arctic latitude. If you're getting chills, then I agree. Because it all makes a lot of sense. Let me fit this into the screen. Needs to be a bit bigger. Can you see it now? Nope. Can you see it now? Yep. I'm just going to move this up slightly. Anybody wonder why I have a snowy background? So this is what we were just talking about. The distance from the Earth to the Moon is about 30 kiloyogenas. Like literally almost exactly 30 kiloyogenas if the yojana is 12.9 kilometers. The average distance from the Earth to the Moon. And Shuka's distance from Bharata to Kuru, which would be marked by the distance between the Arctic lines, Shweta and Himkuta, is it should be Hemakuta, is also practically exactly 30 kiloyogenas, 29.57 kiloyogenas. So, whoa, his models are way too big, yet they also exactly make sense. So that gives the confidence that there's some kind of key or code to translate from his scale to our scale. You see, and this is why he's saying that the Karmakshetra for humans is in Bharata, and the Swarga is up past the moon. And in between the moon and Bu is Bhuva, or Bhoma Swarga. The significance of this observation gets significant support in the current text, wherein Shuka says that the human version of the Earth is contained by the limit of the southern Arctic. He also says that the rest of Bu is a subheaven. Bhom Swarga. The moon is considered to be just below Swarga, thus it fits perfectly that Swarga should begin just beyond the North Pole of Bu. And the regions between the North Pole and the southern Arctic should be semi-heavens, higher or better than Earth, but not quite as high and perfect as paradise. Okay, now let's discuss how to translate Shuka's ratio, Bharata to Bu, into a numeric value. So this ratio, I coined the term perceptual ratio. It means how much you can perceive. The ratio of how much you can perceive versus what's really there. So he describes the perceptual ratio simply as the same as the ratio between Bharata and Bu. Now, what does that mean? According to Shuka, we perceive only a portion of our world. In other words, our Bu is smaller than the full Bu. How much smaller? Shuka indicated that the ratio of what we perceive compared to what we don't perceive can be deduced by comparing the size of Bharata to the size of Bu. But how do you compare the size? Because there's all kinds of different ways of measuring size. There are several dimensions. Now, why didn't he just say so? Because it's empirical, so you can figure it out. You can measure it with your eyes. There are several dimensions by which an object can be measured. Here they are for Bu and Bharata. So here are the various ways of assessing size of things. You can assess the base, like the base size. So for example, let me make sure I get in focus. So for example, like this line is the base for anything below it. Yeah? This line would be the base. So you can see that 17.19 would be the base for the Arctic region. So you can do the base. Bu's base is its full diameter, and Bharata's base is exactly half that diameter. So that would indicate a ratio of 50%. We perceive 50% of what's there. Another way to assess relative size is by the arc. The arc means the outside, the curve along the outside. So as you can see, every zone or varsha has 9 kiloyogenas of arc, and so the whole thing is 108 kiloyogenas. So the whole Bharata has 108 kiloyogenas, and the arc of Bharata is 9 times 2 because it has an eastern and a western division. So that's 16.67. It's like 16 and a third, 2/3. 16 and 2/3%. That's that ratio. That means if you compare the size in that way, it means that we perceive 16 and 2/3% of what's really out there. Another very simple way to do a comparison is just say, well, there's 9 varshas in total, and Bharata is one of them. So it's a 9-to-1 ratio, 11.11%. Another way to compare it, since the Vedic cosmography orients things vertically very often, right? Everything is vertical. So you could do the vertical height. The height of Bu is the full diameter, 34.38. The height of Bharata is only 2.3 kiloyogenas. You see, that's what happens on spheres. In circles, when you get close to the pole, the vertical height decreases dramatically. So that would give you a percentage of 6.6, 6 and 2/3, or 6.69. Meaning that we only perceive about 6 or 7% of what's out there. If you do spherical area, you get exactly the same result, because spherical area is based on the vertical. So those are the numbers for the spherical area. In the comparison of the spherical area, if you do planar area, like the way Shuka tends to talk, the way he tends to give his measurements is on a plane, like a polar plane, the plane through the pole, like this diagram is. So then if you do that kind of area, then you get 2.88%. So that would be the area in the way in which Shuka most commonly speaks about things, which it has the most rational support to it, because the area is the space that we would access, but expressed in terms of the model that he usually gives his geometry on, which is a two-dimensional projection plane cut from the pole of the sphere. Or finally, you could do total volume. And total volume would give you 1.28. The difference in the volume of Bharata has 237 kilojuna square volume, and Bu has a huge 21,000 kilojuna cubed volume. So that's just 1.28%. Finally, if you want, you can sum up all of those values and get a summary value, and that would be 2.25%. Those are the options for how to get an actual number out of the concept of we only perceive Bu out of the whole Bharata. Now let's assess the options. Just rationally speaking, the planar area is probably, like hermeneutically speaking, the planar area is probably the one that he has in mind, because that's the way that he tends to describe things all the time. However, also, all of Shuka's measurements for everything he has measured so far will match the astronomy we observe with modern equipment, using either the 2.88 or the 2.25% ratio. But that's astounding. That's astounding that we found the key to translate Shuka's measurements to ours. And it will work either with 2.88 or 2.25. 2.88 works if the yojana is 12.9 kilometers. Yojana is a distance measurement, and if we say that each yojana is 12.9 kilometers, then it will match the Earth exactly when we apply the 2.88% ratio. 2.25 works if the yojana is 16.5 kilometers. What is a yojana really supposed to be? It's defined as 2,000. What is it? 2,000? No, it's one horse distance. One distance that a horse can travel before becoming exhausted, which is supposed to be 2,000 bows, and each bow is supposed to be 4 forearms. And so, that's a kind of a flexible measurement. It's somewhere between 8 and 16 kilometers. So these values fit within that range of what it's supposed to be. But 12.9 is a better fit. 16.5 is kind of on the high side. The 2.25, 16.5 option, however, will be somewhat inaccurate when measuring the distance between the Earth and the Sun. So Shuka gave in this chapter the measurement of the distance between Earth and the Sun. And if we use this option of 16.5 kilojoulejoules, we'll get a 9% error. It'll be a little bit, Shuka's Sun will be a little too far away. On the other hand, 2.88 with 12.9 kilojoules gives a perfect, almost perfect, modern measurement with 1% margin of error, and also provides the same or even better accuracy for the size of the Sun, the Earth, and the Earth's core, mantle, and crust, all explained here. It also gives an exact correlation between the distance to the Moon and the distance between the Arctic circles of Bu. I therefore prefer it. So you could use either one to solve the riddle, but I prefer the 2.88 percentage one to solve the riddle. Not only because it solves the riddle better, but also because it's just fitting in Shuka's way of speaking. He generally speaks about his measurements in that sense. Now let's talk about how you apply this perceptual ratio. Now, what about the title of this section, Dark Matter? Does this make any sense to you? Do you know what the theory of dark matter is, or do you just think it's like the dark web or something? If you know what the theory of dark matter is, all of a sudden this is starting to make a little sense. Application of the perceptual ratio. Here's how you apply it. Shuka's manner of describing Bu and other structures is to establish Meru and then define an altitude from Meru. Geometrically, Meru is the center and the altitude is the distance from the center to the edge. In other words, the radius. Shuka adopts this approach with good reason because it's the most concise way to describe all the essential dimensions of a sphere. I mean, this is all Greek geometry and it's all this, the center and the radius, bam, that's all we need to know. We figure out everything else. You want something complicated, just give me an angle to it and I'll tell you everything about this sphere. And so Shuka, that's the way that he describes his structures. He gives a center and then he gives an altitude to the edge. So in other words, he's doing radius-based descriptions. Since this is his approach, his intention is very probably that the perceptual ratio that we just determined should be applied to this process. It should be applied to the radius. In other words, it should be applied to the radius of the objects that he described. Applying the 2.8% ratio to Bu's 17.9 kilojana radius reduces it to about 500 yojana, giving a diameter for the Earth of about 1 kilojana, which not only is a nice simple number, but also perfectly matches the modern measurements perfectly. You can make it perfect if you just say it's whatever, 12. You can fiddle with the kilojana, with the definition of the yojana to literally get 0% error. Those who are fluent in calculations, however, might hesitate here, since it might seem incongruent to directly alter a radius using a ratio derived from area. So for this, we have Mudit Pant to thank. He debated this with me for a while. The relationship between a radius and an area isn't linear, so it doesn't seem entirely right to take a ratio from an area and then apply it to a radius. So those who are fluent in calculations or devoted mathematicians might hesitate because it seems incongruent to directly alter a radius using a ratio derived from area. An alternative then is to use the 2.25% ratio derived from a sum of all the dimensions and then define the yojana as 16.5 and resign oneself to a moderate inaccuracy in Shuka's measures of distance, like the distance between the Earth to the Sun. Personally, I prefer to remember that Shuka did not have a mathematician's ethics, and therefore he didn't mind using a ratio of area to reduce calculations beginning from radii, because that ratio was easily articulated and expedient, and also because it is based on something significant in Shuka's metaphysical cosmos, the relative dimensions of Swarga, Bhuva, and Bu. So that's, for those who can relate with that part of the conversation, that's the conversation for that. In other words, what I'm saying is, yeah, if Shuka wasn't a Bhakta, if he was a mathematician and that's all that he was, then he probably would have not given you any of this stuff. He probably wouldn't have talked about lotus flowers and oceans. He probably would have just given you numbers and formulas, and that would be the end of the story. But he's not a mathematician, he's a Bhakta, and his astronomy is not meant to give you accurate dimensions, it's meant to give you prema, ananda. But, so therefore, when he does something that a mathematician might not do, it's not really a cause for an alarm. Especially when it makes sense in his model and with his universe. In other words, it's very easy for him to say it's the relationship between Bharata and Bu. Just apply that, and you'll get the correct sizes for everything, and then he can move on. So that's why I say it's expedient. and easily articulated. It's easy to say, and it's quick, and it's expedient. The other thing is that, actually speaking, Earth is sitting on Bharata, and the moon is sitting at Kuru, the North Pole, the North Arctic. So actually speaking, there is Swarga from Kuru down to Bharata, and then there's Bu. I mean, not Swarga, but Bhuva, Boma Swarga, from Kuru down to Bu, and then there's Bu at Bharata. Bu is really concentrated in Bharata. So it's actually real what he's saying to his metaphysical perception. So that's why he's pointing to that ratio, and he doesn't really care that a mathematician will complain or get confused. So that should be maybe more clear to people who are wondering about that. Casper asks if these values are dynamic. So is the rate of change mentioned. What would be dynamic? No, the Earth is not changing its size. No, none of these values are said to be dynamic. Now let's go on and describe the effect of the perceptual ratio. So what happens when you apply the ratio? The ratio uniformly affects all dimensions of an object with mass, such that the object retains its shape and all its characteristics, merely at different scales of size. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. You got a shrinker beam, a ray gun, it shrinks something. They still look like your daughter. They still look like your son. They're just tiny. Because what you did was you just reduced everything by the same amount, so the scales were all kept intact. Therefore, when Shuka says the whole human realm of karma is confined to Bharata, he does not mean this. He doesn't mean we're all living here. It doesn't mean that we all live on an inverted polar dome blanketed everywhere with snow and ice. We live in the Arctic Circle of Bu. Is that what he's saying? I mean, he himself is speaking to Parikshit in northern India, which is certainly not a polar region. So it would be ludicrous for us to think that he's describing Earth as a snow, the planet Hoth from Star Wars, the ice planet. What he means is that the entirety of Bu, with all the latitudes and the dimensions previously described, is all uniformly scaled down by 2.88% of its full size. So what you get is the exact Bu that is this, still is this. It's still exactly this. It's just not the same size anymore. It's 2.88% of that size. Another very interesting thing about how we use the perceptual ratio to get accurate empirical measurements is that we do not apply the perceptual ratio to the distance, measurements of distance that Shuka gives. This is really interesting, and this will also lock it in with dark matter theory. So when you derive empirically accurate measures from Shuka's description, we will not apply the perceptual ratio to his statement about the distance from Bu to Bhagavata, from Earth to the Sun. The justification for this is that the perception of mass is the issue. It's the perception of objects. Distance is in space. Distance is through a vacuum. It doesn't involve mass. So Shuka said that objects with mass, specifically Bu, are not fully perceived by us. Distance is through a massless vacuum, therefore it need not be affected. So this also is locking it into the thinking behind the dark matter theory, because they're saying, where's the mass? They're not saying where's the distance. They're saying where's the mass? So this may possibly help us make some sense out of a few perplexing questions. When you consider this, that the distance remains the same, but the objects within the space shrink, it may make sense out of this question, which has always bothered me personally. Why is the universe so damn empty? Why is it so empty? Why are there such distances, huge distances between things? So considering this perceptual ratio thing, it implies that actually there's not that much distance between the things. In fact, if you could access the whole Earth, you could walk to the moon. Just like you could travel to the North Pole, you could walk to the moon if you could access Boo in its entirety. That's how close they are. So that ratio fills up the emptiness of space. Not entirely packed full, but it fills it up and makes it seem more reasonable. So the ratio implies that the distances are much, much shorter or sometimes non-existent to superhuman beings who have access to higher planes of reality. You ever wonder, how does Vyas just show up at a place? How does Narada move around? It's because it appears to us that he's just teleporting from a blink to another blink. But to him, he's just taking a step from one location to another. Like in Minecraft, if you move in the nether, you move 8 blocks in the above world. Something like that. Let me see. There's a couple of questions. Let me finish with this and then I'll look at the questions. Why is a speed limit imposed on particles with mass? This is the second kind of perplexing thing about the universe, is that nothing can go as fast as the speed of light. Unless something doesn't have mass, in which case it can only go at the speed of light. It can't go at any other speed. Of course, they have these new things now with quantum spooky movements, but those might not be motions, those might be changes of state. Changes of state rather than change of position, and the state may cause a change in position. But basically, by the Einsteinian models, you can't get any object with mass to get to the speed of light. But if an object has no mass, like a photon, you can't get it to slow down. It will only go at the speed of light. This restriction that is only placed upon mass seems a little bit relevant to that discussion too. I don't know, it may not be relevant. These are just some ideas that are in my head. The ratio may imply that we perceive massless things at fairly close to their full potential, without limitation. Our limitation of mass is perceived. Our limitation of our perception of mass is limited, but our perception of massless entities is not. This is what Shuka is saying. Or that's what we derive from what Shuka said. So, therefore, massless particles don't seem to have a limit, but massive particles do. A third thing is this dark matter thing. Why do the laws of gravity and other laws not tally with the amount of observed mass in the universe? And this is the question that prompts the dark matter theory. Now, it's pretty damn interesting to correlate the amount of missing matter proposed by dark matter theories. It's pretty damn close to the amount that is proposed by our derivation of Shuka's Bhu to Bharata ratio. So generally, the dark matter theories that I've heard about, they're proposing that 95% of stuff is dark. And dark means it's imperceptible. We don't see it. You can't interact with it. Just exactly like what Shuka said. So look at this. Metaphysical stuff is actually pushing its footprint into physics. Whereas what did Shuka say, or what did we derive from what Shuka said? 97. So it's 95 versus 97. It's pretty close to the same number. So that might be what they're onto. The dark matter theory might be wrong, but if it's correct, or the correctness which is within it, they might be actually noticing the footprint of the metaphysical characteristics, that is more mass in the cosmos than we have access to. All right, any more questions? And let's see, there's a couple of questions that already came in. Kermit asks, Earth, Bhulok, Earth to Sun, Antariksha, Bhu, Varlok, Sun to Dhruv, Swargalok. Is this correct? How am I supposed to know that question, Kermit? This is the difference. If you want to become a good communicator, you have to realize that the people you're talking to aren't in your head. It's very difficult for me because I can't see you. So I don't know where your headspace is at. But at least I realize you're not in my head, so I try to explain the things. So when asking a question to somebody, try to realize that they're not inside your head. And take your time and ask it. Because if you ask it well, then you'll get the answer probably that you actually wanted to know. So I don't know what you really mean. Do you mean, are these correct? I don't really know what precisely you're referring to. His correct measurements are the size of the core of the Earth, the size of the mantle, the size of the crust, the complete size of the Earth, the size of the ecliptic, which produces the tropical latitudes and the Arctic latitudes, the divisions of the ecliptic into quadruplicities and triplicities are accurate as far as astrologers are concerned. Even the qualities of the quadruplicities and triplicities as fire, dual, etc., are accurate as far as we know them as astrologers. The size of the sun, the distance to the sun, the orbit of the Earth around the sun, and the rotation of the Earth were all the things that he gave in the previous chapter explained here in this book. It actually makes sense. So all those were accurate. He didn't give a measure to the pole star. At the beginning of the chapter, we tried to derive a measure of where the pole star is, but we couldn't. We thought maybe we could derive a measure of the pole star from the fact that Vishnu kicked a hole in the universe and the water comet that came in, the ice that came in, hit the pole star, but we realized that we couldn't. So we don't have that measurement to see if it's correct or not. It's probably not correct, because it's an entirely different way. The way that I really shouldn't give my opinion on this yet because we haven't really looked at it yet. But my uninformed opinion is that the Vedic way of looking at stars is just observational. They don't care about light year distances, but I could be wrong. I haven't gotten to investigate that yet. Casper, does this mean that science will never be able to empirically measure the upper Bhu values? Human empirics will not without help from a trans-empirical source. So in other words, not without help from a Purana or a Veda. With Shuka's help, via the Vedic transmission, we get this 2.88 perceptual ratio, and so we can measure everything. But if you want to be strictly empirical and bar non-empirical sources of information, then you can't. But does that not make perfect sense? If you bar non-empirical measures, then you can't measure non-empirical things. Casper also asks, what do you think of some scientists' interpretation of Einstein's theory of relativity indicating a block universe? I'm not aware of that. Jonathan Henkel asks, so it's so interesting that gravity is the link between the physical and metaphysical. It's how we know that there is dark matter. We can see the gravitational effect of it. That is interesting. Ronaldo asks, kind of relative to the other worlds we can't see. If, for example, the Nagas doesn't have sun, how do they know their karma? We know based on zodiac, based on the sun, but they have no sun. But they have no karma either. It's the Bogastan. It's the Bhogakshetra. It's not the Karmakshetra. The ecliptic is organized around Bhu, and it's not organized around the moon. When people ask, like, what if you lived on Mars? The zodiac, here's an interesting answer. The ecliptic is organized around Bhu. Our Bhu, the Karmakshetra for us, is where it indicates the karmas. But it's not organized. Perhaps it is not organized around Nagalok or Swargalok or any of the other lokas. because they are not initiating karmas. They're simply on a trajectory. If you type in a trajectory, then you can set a vector in motion and watch it fly. So that's what you do in Bhuloka, is you type in a trajectory by performing activities. Then that trajectory takes you to Nagalok, Indralok, any lok. But while you're there, you're not changing your trajectory unless you engage in some non-karmic activity. So that you can perform jnana and bhakti in those regions, but you can't perform karma in those regions. Ayo Ata says or asks, I feel like I have an intuitive understanding, but when I try to wrap my head around the math, my eyes start crossing. So that's because it's difficult. So look, let me just show you my scratch pad. This is going to be funny. My eyes have crossed so many times in the past few months that it's a wonder that they still point forward. So the thing is, if you want, you have to go through that tapas of your eyes crossing and uncrossing in order to get the understanding of things. Let me see if I can show you some. Look at my scratch pad. This is some of the stuff that I have to deal with. And this is after I figured it out well enough that I could stick it into a spreadsheet. This is just one of the pages. Here's another one. Here's another one. This was abandoned. This just produced moderately interesting results. This is where we were trying to calculate the distance to the cosmic boundary, speed of the comet. There's a lot of eye crossing that goes on. But if you want to be able to resolve it mathematically, then that's what you have to go through. If you don't care about that, then you don't have to care about that. Or if you're somewhere in between, then you can let a scientist or a mathematician or somebody else do it. But then you have to trust them. Okay, what else do we have? Kermit says, sorry for bad articulation. What I wanted to ask is if Antariksha is between Earth and Sun as stated, then shouldn't the varshas lie in a plane because it can't be Antariksha? Why no? Antariksha means it is in the middle region. I don't know. You have to watch everything and read everything and learn everything in sequence. Otherwise, you can get misperception of what's being said. So the astronomy of the 5th canto has to start at chapter 16 and move to 17. And while you're in 17, you have to be fortifying what's in 16, not contradicting it. Then when you move to 18, you have to fortify what was in 16 and 17 and not contradict it, etc., etc. And I think it'll end around 24, chapter 24. So this talk about Antariksha is like somewhere up there in the 20s. And what this is really saying is that the sun is in the middle. What the Antariksha concept is really proving is the heliocentrism. That the actual models of motion are heliocentric. This is conveyed by the term Antariksha. The sun is exactly in the middle of the anda, of the space. So the sun moves in Antariksha, and the earth moves with it, and the earth moves on a plane. The earth moves on a plane, and the orbits of the planets are on a plane. They're planar. They're on the ecliptical plane. The planets themselves are not planes. The planets themselves are spheres. And that is the first statement that Shuka makes. That's why you have to understand things sequentially. The first statement in the first chapter about the astronomy is Bhugola, Kamalaya. It's a round, closed-up lotus, which is a sphere, Golak. It's a ball. It's a gold kapas. But again, let's wait. Like for things about Dhruvloka, we'll see the description of nakshatras is going to come like in chapter 20-something. Description of Rashis is going to come in chapter 20-something, a little bit before that. One before that. Description of Antariksha will come. When we get there, we'll get there. If we rush to just answer every question and know every answer, we'll just know our own imaginations. So take your time. Let's take our time and study each thing as we get to it. All right, that was over quickly. That's what happens when things are exciting and pleasant. You don't notice the passage of time. All right, then, if there's any more questions, if there's no more questions, we can stop. Thank you, Mary. My favorite part, of course, the whole Bhagavatam is really the whole Bhagavatam. That's the thing. Okay, I'm going to end it here. Thank you so much. Thank you.